So, hello everyone, and welcome to our panel on scaling your D2C startup. Tips, tricks, and pitfalls to avoid. I'm Nicola, partner at Growth & Company, where we support companies achieve their growth goals and scaling efficiently and diversifying marketing channels away from the big money pits. Google and Meta is going to be high on many agendas this year. So what better way to get some great insights and recommendations than to bring together three experts in this space? They all provided incredible value in the in-person session we ran on the topic back in November. So the challenge is on, guys. We want some more. Now, we also want to make this as interactive as possible. So we're going to be chatting for around 30 to 40 minutes. And then we'd love to hear from some of you, as well as answer any questions. And as this is interactive, I want to hear from all of you. So please do introduce yourselves in chat and share two things. Number one, how much of your marketing budget is going to Google and Meta? I am so interested to see this. And two, what other channels have you found success with? TikTok Shop, influencers, above the line. We're very keen to hear from you. So let's go over to our panel now for some quick introductions. Matt, let's start with you.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm one of the co-founders at Pure. So hence I've been there from the very start. So we've actually been going for, about just over 10 years now, but we went from a pure bootstrap business. So we actually started, and I'm not over exaggerating when I say this, with a £300 overdraft, and then have scaled it right through. And now we're at about a 30 million run rate and looking to double this year. And as you can imagine, to get there, we've done every single trick you can think of, from very scrappy to now in the scale-up process. Jonathan, who's also on the panel, is one of our investors, and we've been through that process as well from the very start to where we are now.
Wow, Matt, what a journey! Looking forward to hearing more. And Lisa?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Rodwell. I think I've met a number of you. I guess the best way to introduce myself is sometimes through sharing some of the companies I've worked at over the years, which you'll notice has a theme. They're all consumer facing. They all are either 100% digital, or that was what sort of they started as. I've worked on everything from, I was saying, online dating way back when I was at Yahoo and eBay. I've done online printing at moo.com. I was the CEO of a company called Wool and the Gang, which still is actually, I would say, DIY fashion. Also did some time at FinTech, at Starling and Nutmeg. And then more recently, probably for the last 5 years, I've focused my interest in health and wellness space, but all marketing towards consumers, so direct to consumer. I've, excuse me, as a CEO at Day, which is a women's health company. I was leading up the sort of the US charge for Zoe recently, and now I'm doing some work with Newman, who have really grown in the last couple of years as they've shifted their target audience and offerings much wider than they did in the past. And we were talking before about how January is a big time when people consider losing weight, and they have anti-obesity medicine and a whole program, which has, but that's not what I'm focused on.
Thanks, Lisa. That is quite the portfolio. So there's going to be some amazing insights from you. And Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all here. I'm Jonathan. Joined Mercia Ventures about 18 months ago. One of the most active UK-based VC funds across investing across sort of all stages and all sectors. But I'm most excited about consumer. We've got an incredible portfolio, including Pure Pet Foods, as you have seen already. Prior to that, spent 3 years working at Google, advising fast-growing seed and Series A stage consumer startups on a whole manner of things, from product through to branding, digital marketing, and so on. And then before that, ran my own VC-backed D2C startup. So I've been on the other side of the table as well.
Nice. Thank you. Well, let's get on with some questions. Let's start with, you've all worked on or with successful D2C brands. What have been some of the biggest learnings in your journeys, and particularly over the last 12 months? Lisa, can we start with you?
Yes, you caught me. I was reading all the comments in chat, but I mean, one of the things that I was reminded of in 2024, and it's not unique to 2024, but I was reminded actually when I was at Zoe, that sometimes you are focused on your competitive set so finely, or you think that you don't have certain competitors. But what you have to sometimes step out and actually step into the shoes of your potential customers and think, what else might they be spending their money on that is actually competitive to you as it relates to kind of share of their wallet? And I think when you do that, you sometimes think of the challenge a little bit differently. So the example that I was talking about there was thinking about Zoe, which is a personalized nutrition program. It's not a weight loss program. It's very much about personalized nutrition. However, the time I was there, I'm not sure that we were thinking as broadly of our competitive set to think about all the rise in really the anti-obesity GLP-1 drugs, such as, I'm sure you've all heard of them, Ozempic and Wegovy, etc. And I think that's about just thinking more broadly about where your consumer might be. And as I said, it's not specific to 2024, but it's what I was reminded of as I was sort of challenged a couple times during the year, thinking, why isn't this working? And I think it was because I wasn't thinking from a consumer perspective enough. I wasn't thinking what their landscape looked like.
That's super helpful. I think it comes back to that jobs to be done framework. And what other products and services are doing a similar job that you weren't initially looking at in your competitor set. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I to be honest, I'd sort of build on what Lisa said there. I think I did. I don't know if everyone else does this, but you have that Christmas period where you try to forget about things and switch off, and then you very quickly get back into reflecting that period before you go back to work. And if I look at kind of the journey that we've been on, we've had pretty remarkable growth, I would say. I definitely wouldn't put it all on myself, but from the team, and we've really got in that scale-up process. But if I was to be probably critical of the last 12 months, or not critical, it's more of just where we were on the journey. I would say we were in executional mode. So we've scaled some channels really successfully, and we essentially did a lot more of that. And what you realize when you're scaling is things work until they start to not work, and you get to certain points where channels reach ceilings, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what I've reflected on is that actually we did a period in about 2022 where we took what I would class as big swings, doing what Lisa's just talked about, of going back to that jobs to be done and really thinking about product proposition, pricing. And we were only talking about it yesterday for the next 12 months that we want to get back into that mindset and try and unlock new markets from really thinking about that customer, thinking about customer segmentation and all of those things. So yeah, I think it's that when to execute and when to take what I would class as a big swing. And that's kind of a reflection for us. And I think we need to do more of that again to start to find those other opportunities.
Jonathan, are you seeing something similar amongst your portfolio?
To an extent, I've sort of seen it from a slightly different angle. So I'm always, perhaps rather boringly, as an investor, always thinking about the numbers and the metrics. And I think one of the things that sort of trends that we've seen in businesses that have done well are ones that aren't, I guess, looking to rely on raising VC funding in order to survive, but are sort of thinking from the outset how to build profitable metrics, and have got really good discipline around things like margins, retention, and LTV, a real in a great level of detail, and just sort of relying on being able to raise external capital to keep yourself going and growing is can be quite risky, really, especially in sort of the current climate. Another thing I wanted to mention also is the importance of word of mouth. I think a few years ago it was not particularly in vogue. Everyone was sort of really just thinking about scalable digital channels, but building with sort of word of mouth from the outset can really help, get you towards sort of profit and sustainability and reduce sort of cash burn. So, make it really easy for people to talk about you, make it really easy for people to explain what it is you do and why you're great, is really important. And then the final thing I wanted to add, is sort of attached to it, is the kind of consideration cycle, which is sort of the time between first hearing about you or thinking about you to actually making a purchase. So, really, really long in something expensive, or, like a car or house purchase, for instance. Something's, a little bit more impulsive. And businesses that we've seen kind of do quite well are ones that have quite a short consideration cycle, that can sort of engage and convert customers and explain to them what it is they do and why they're great, really quickly. And again, that's all sort of, I think, tied to sort of, the ease of talking about and spreading word of mouth.
Yeah, so that full customer journey, and then getting your customers to do your job for you, which is always positive. Thank you to everyone that's been adding into the chat some really interesting insights there. And I may be requesting some of you to share a little bits of your experiences. We're seeing rising costs and often reduced effectiveness with the classic growth channels, Google and Meta. Yeah, even just looking in chat, on average, we're seeing between 60 to 80% of spend going on those two channels. How do we diversify away from those? Matt, what have you been considering and seen success in so far? And what are you thinking about for this year as well?
Yeah, I'll talk to kind of both separately. So we probably spend, I would say, we probably sit at about the 60% mark across Google and Meta, maybe slightly less. And the big sort of remainder 40%, the majority of it is taken up by our in-person, face-to-face channel. And that was really an unlock that happened around those iOS updates, where we first saw those main digital channels start to creak, and we went down a bit of an exploration of what new channels could we open up, and how can we effectively not rely on an algorithm change that's going to kill us overnight. And so we went back to that whole point of what we've just said at the start, that kind of customer proposition. And for us, knowing, to Jonathan's point, our unit economics, what CPA we can afford to pay, and knowing the customer journey, and thinking about ours is a very considered purchase. Dog food actually is something that, our customers treat dogs like children, really think about it. So we thought about what kind of channels could we best get across the proposition. And that's where we started testing in-person events face-to-face. One of the things that we did, which I would advocate anyone to do, especially in this climate where, cash is not plentiful for everybody, is really think about those new channels as like a bottom-up approach. So, I literally, to test it, got a little bit of validation from people I'd seen doing it in the field, like Freddy's Flowers, HelloFresh, etc. But then as simple as got a gazebo, stuck it on a high street and started talking to customers, and really understood that full proposition customer journey. And then once we'd got validation that actually, well, I can sell it, I'm probably not going to be the best salesperson, we then start to scale it. And, that now takes up, in terms of our acquisition mix, about 35 to 40%. We did, should I say, last calendar or this calendar year, just under 30,000 acquisitions from that channel. And that came from me stood on a street, first of all, figuring out I could sell 5 or 6 in a day. So that's kind of the process we went through. And thinking about that for new channels going again this year, we're essentially doing the same thing, going back to let's test, validate, use internal resource, get under the skin of it, speak to customers, really understand it. And then once you've got those reasons to believe, then start to scale it. And that's kind of what the process has been for us to kind of test, validate, scale. And that's the process I would advocate for.
And Matt, is there a specific channel that you're really excited about testing this year?
I would say we're quite interested in more experiential ways to bring face-to-face to life, in terms of actual, almost like high street stores, and making it more of an experience where you could have a coffee away your dog, etc. But also as well, I'm interested definitely, and we're actually speaking to a business called Free Soul, which I'm sure some of you on the call know about next week, who I know the head of growth really well, of starting to explore this kind of performance mindset of influencer. So, influencers have probably gone from the kind of like Love Island pay extreme amounts for a one-off post to actually starting to think about it from a performance where, you know, that affiliate style commission, but using content and kind of all the things that we know that work on social. So that's certainly something that I'm interested, because I've seen the scale that those guys have got from it, and it feels like it could work for us. But again, we'll go to that kind of like test, validate, and scale process.
Great. There's a couple of people in the audience that I know are using influencers. So if anyone's happy to chat about their experiences, please just ping a note in chat, and I'll bring you off onto the mic in a second. Lisa, how about you? What are your key channels for this year, and what are you excited?
Well, I mean, where I am right now, and I do work with a lot of different other businesses, but the one that I'm at right now, there is such demand, which is a great place to be, but it therefore pushes you to Google. Like, there's a mass amount of demand for the product, but how do you differentiate the broader program? So Newman has a weight loss program, but often what people are searching for is the specific drug name, the actual medication. So I think what we're doing at Newman that is maybe different than a lot of, say, the online pharmacies and so forth, is both investing in brand through television, old school, but like it isn't necessarily used in the same way anymore, as well as, you know, referrals. Someone mentioned that before. It's not new, but I think what's important is, how do you do it? And what can you, not necessarily the financial incentive that you can give to customers, but what are those nuggets of differentiation that you can give to customers that they can talk about? Like, for example, and this isn't where I am today, but, you know, back in the day, actually, I worked at Moo, and Nicola, you did too. You know, a lot of the referrals we got from other people were from the cards themselves, but also our customers just talking about how great the packaging and the experience was, and the little, you know, surprise and delights. So sometimes being able to package up your differentiated, why you're different from what seems quite similar to other people, to your customers, so they can communicate it to others, is really important in your referral program. I think word of mouth and referral is huge. The other thing that I personally love, and Matt sort of suggests this as well, is I like in-person events. I think if you pick the right ones for your vertical, they can be so powerful for learning, which it sounds like that's what Matt got from his time on the street corner, but learning and hearing how your customers sell your product to other people, because it will invariably happen when you're standing there. Someone will come up and go, you know, I love Day, or I love whatever the brand is, and you'll hear them sell your attributes, and just an opportunity to really bring the brand to life.
Yeah, really nice.
Sorry, Nicola, just to add to that, we actually found, because, you know, I think you can get really bogged down in channels, but actually a lot of them, to Lisa's point, sort of translate into the other, and actually selling on the stands made our digital channels work better, because we realized the objections literally in person, and we then started to translate that into our creative that went online, and some of those ads have been, and even stuff like, we realized when we told people in the pitch that we were on Dragon's Den, people literally loved it. So then that went into our ads, and that's now our best performing ads, even though we went on Dragon's Den a long time ago, you know. So it's quite
so that customer value is also super useful too. Jonathan, I think a couple of your portfolio have been doing more in-person events.
Yeah, that's right. So actually, a couple of things we've seen recently that are probably worth touching on. Talked about influencers as well. Just to mention that quickly. We looked at a sanitary product business about a year ago, one of the fastest growing in Europe, and they'd essentially productized their sort of influencer function. So over 50% of their new customers were coming through influencers, and they built a team in-house to create content, to manage sort of 4,000 or 5,000 influencers across 3 or 4 different geographies, and ensure there was kind of consistency and a regular a regular sort of pattern of posting, and everything was measured as well. So it was a sort of taking influencer to a kind of level of sophistication we hadn't seen previously. Also on the subject of in-person events. So business we're looking at in the pet space made an investment in, not yet announced. So can't talk too much about it just yet, but they put an events in various parks around London with no product, no sort of selling happening, but it was all about just giving a great experience to dogs. And the result of that was loads of people leaving them reviews, lots of people talking about them, lots of people signing up. They gave them sort of little products to take away as well. It was sort of, we've seen businesses that are really comfortable not selling, but are just sort of happy to build brand awareness, cash permitting, would always encourage that sort of thing. And I think in the eyes of customers, if they're not just being sold to, that can go down pretty well.
Absolutely. And also great user-generated content.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about influencers. So if it's okay, Nathan, would you be happy to share a little bit about some of your experiences? Because I know that's quite a core channel for you at Popsa.
Yeah, so we have quite a unique challenge at Popsa because ours is a personalized product. So unlike a kind of product that you can just ship to an influencer and have them hold it and wear it and show it off, we actually have to get them to make it. And that actually presents quite a lot of challenges for us. And the other challenge we have is that we're an app. So measurement, I mean, measurement in the influencer space is really challenging as it is, but as an app, it's even more challenging. So we work with, so the way we do it and the way we make it work for us is we actually use our influencers also in paid ads. And as part of our kind of SEO and content strategy. So we use the budget in 3 different places. So with some influencers, we'll do like just a simple paid partnership. With other influencers, they'll be starring in our ads as well. And so that's how we kind of blend the budget to make it work more effectively for us, which is, I guess efficiency has been a big challenge for us, and that's how we've managed to make it work. But from the experience that I've had at Popsa, it's been incredibly hit and miss. So we've had some macro influencers, 1 or 2, that have literally like done so much business for us, and then it can be so variable outside of that. Like some influencers who we thought were very, very safe bets have done literally nothing. The other thing we do is we use a platform called Gifter. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but they basically, so you select a bunch, you buy a number of influencers for a campaign, and they actually manage the whole process for you. It's a gifting campaign, so the influencer doesn't have to post, but they have an 85% post rate, which is amazing. And so we see that as that's a very effective kind of lower cost micro strategy that works really well for us. I do think, like, we're quite a small business, but I do think if you're a bit bigger, it's much better to do it in house. I think, Johnny, you mentioned that it's much more effective to build your influencer base in house, but we've been using some external parties to do that, and that's worked quite nicely for us. But it's a challenging channel.
Nathan, would you mind sharing the URL for Gifter? That would be.
Yes, happy to. Yeah, no worries.
Matt, you also talked about Freesold, and actually we have Mehul here who's done some work with them. So Mehul, would you be happy to just chat about some of the work you've done with them, with influencers? I think you've also done some on TikTok Shop.
Sure. Thanks, Nicola. So Matt, actually, when you were talking about Freesold, so I think maybe you're speaking to Ted or Arjun there.
Ted, yeah, both of them actually, yeah.
So I was there for, a year building the team and stuff like that, and TikTok Shop and influencer. So yeah, I think there's somebody here from Wild Nutrition. So they're also Wild Cosmetics, Wild Nutrition. They're also quite good on influencers. In terms of influencers, so the thing is now the term is really blurred. and I have seen it at AirUp also. I built influencer in 2020. It was influencer first approach. It was not reliant on, well, there couldn't be search because AirUp is a unique proposition in terms of the product. But now, long story short, influencer has become a saturated channel from a performance perspective. And there is a pyramid approach. Just like we talk about 360, even in influencer marketing, it's become 360. On the lower end, you have affiliates, then brand affiliates, then influencers, and then brand ambassadors. So anybody thinking about influencers is no more a linear channel. You can start with just, even Nathan was saying, you can start with affiliates where you're paying on commission, or gifting where you're just gifting, which is the lower end, which is all you need. Then you can look into brand affiliates. The differences with affiliates is you may not want to be associated them as a brand, but they have smaller audiences, they are engaged, and they drive good sales. So that's purely transactional at scale opportunities. Brand affiliates are the ones where maybe you want to add them as a part of your Slack group, WhatsApp group. They can also come to your events. So huge fan of in-person events, but brand affiliates get that TLC that open affiliates don't. Influencers, the way I look at it, we test the influencers to see if they are, because they need to be aligning to the brand aspects also, but also generate revenue, not either or. And if they work as a part of test campaign, they can be graduated towards brand ambassadors. And then you have pure creators. So at AirUp, again, money was not an object. We were spending about €500,000 a month, sending bunch of products and everything to these particular creators who had a high index following in Nordics market. But that was a lot of money. So, and then there was an AirUp Island that was created, but that was an extreme, example of influencers and experiential. So the whole point of influencer is looking it as a 360 channel in itself, and not just a sales channel or an awareness channel. That's where even free. So, and then again, you can invite them to your lives, TikTok lives, Instagram lives. You can invite them to your events, but they are basically, there is an audience in itself. You can, I have had the experience of launching products. So as Nathan was saying, being as a part. So if you are creating a deal with your brand ambassadors or brand affiliates, they can be a part of your content, either UGC or in-short content, or they can also front your lives if your TikTok is there. Or, for example, if you're working with influencers who have a contents and free souls case, we were working with influencers who we also used and leveraged during events. Maybe they were doing a Pilates class or this type of class, or talking about, women health issues, but they were also influencers. So it's just, a bit more of a 360 view of it and how you can leverage them across all your channels. Yeah. Hope that was helpful.
No, super valuable.
Yeah, really helpful, yeah.
And just talking about the Pilates classes and things like that, I've seen a few people say they're looking at testing podcasts, and we've got Ant here as well, who has done some work on podcasts. Ant, would you be happy to just share a little bit about your work and how you're finding that?
Yeah, sure. We're only on like our fourth test, I think, on podcasts now, and we ran it at Harry's as well. We work with an agency called Acast, who do all of the admin work, I suppose, of setting you up with podcasts. And we've done a few direct deals as well. But what we found, kind of like influencers, there's massive variability between what performs and what doesn't. So you need to strike that balance between sort of the more expensive podcasts, the smaller ones, and you just need to test quite a high volume to see what works. You can make an educated guess as to what aligns to your audience, but often you'll be like way off the mark, and then ones can really surprise you. So we found like Annie Mac had a podcast called Changes, and we've been on that a few times, and that's absolutely flown, and that's driven the vast majority of our volume on podcasts. But she's now ended her podcast, which isn't
selfish.
Which isn't great for us. But yeah, a lot of people are getting in on the space, and I guess the difficulty can also be the amount of sponsorships that are going on these podcasts now, and some people will they'll promote multiple supplements. So for Wild Nutrition, it's not great, but they'll promote multiple supplements on the same podcast even. So you have to be a little bit strict to sort of say what you are and aren't comfortable with. But it's been a really great way for us to diversify away from Meta and Google. And it can be a bit tricky to measure exactly. But one of the ways we sort of gauge how well it's doing is our post-checkout survey. And when we run tests, we see that fly up in terms of its percentage. So that's been a good sort of confirmation that it's driving incremental growth for us.
And a great extra nugget there of how do you measure this post-checkout? How did you hear
I have
about
a bit of experience with that as well. If you want me to continue on the podcast theme.
Please.
Yeah, Zoe, obviously, for those of you who don't know, it has its own podcast, which is one of the top health and wellness podcasts in the UK, and it's climbing in the US. And my responsibility was for the US. And what we were doing was, rather than we're in a unique position, rather than advertising Zoe, which in itself is quite a complex sell, and it's a very long lead time to purchase. Our goal actually was to continue to build our podcast, which generated real value for free in the US market, where we didn't have the same awareness or the same credibility that that they do here in the UK. So we used advertising actually to do that. And because we were a podcast, there is a lot more tools that you can have to actually test to see, is it actually impacting your own rankings and so forth. So I would agree, it's quite hard to track and figure out actually what it's doing if you're just driving to a sale. I mean, you can use codes, you can try to use URLs, that's more difficult. But there are, and I do think the technology is getting better from podcast to website. It can be quite, depending upon how you buy it, similar to what Ed said, is it can be quite time consuming to find the right podcast. And there's only certain ones that have the reach that you need. So going through a third party is great, but if you're really looking to have a relationship with that podcaster, that almost becomes more of a sort of an influencer deal. You could, depending upon your equity status, there's other ways of playing with it. But I guess and then one other thing I would say is, depending upon your business, if you've got real thought leaders or fantastic speakers or someone who's written a book, using podcasts to get their message out as an individual is an amazing tactic, especially if you manage to get tons and tons of placements within a month or two. It can really get that broader message out, not a sales message, but, working in the health and wellness space, you could have an expert. I'm sure there's other ones in career development, or you name it. That's another strategy, thinking of it more as a PR channel rather than, an advertising channel.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think we often forget about that when we're thinking about the PR mix. Meg, what a question.
Yeah, my question was, thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Sam. My question is, of course, we have seen when you build an audience on a platform, whether it's podcast, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, the organic side, because especially in Zoe case, Lisa, as you were saying, it's a complex value proposition. And some of my clients have more complex value proposition than the other. For example, in Freezehole, it's easy. It's protein powder or this, or it's greens, it's just one product. But more and more with D2C portfolio, there is a physical product, then there is a digital product, just like Zoe, and it can take up to 30 days or 60 days to see an impact, and it's not instant. So my question is, how how to decide which channels to build the audience, because it's such a long-term game, whether it's podcasts, whether it's events, because again, with events, you have to commit to it as a channel, whether it's Instagram, whether it's YouTube. How does one, decide what are the channels that the business will commit? Because you will not see the impact, and the investment will be a longer term investment.
Yeah.
I can add something to that if you like. My experience is not nearly as broad as yours with influencers, Emil, but I can give you mine on face to face. So when we did that, to give you an idea now, that's our when you compare it to Google and Meta, that's our cheapest channel. But when we first started it, it was 3 times more expensive. So one of the things you have to give you right is time, and I would say you've got to. Me personally, probably had to take quite a little bit of brunt at first, but I think there's an element of you're looking for reasons to believe, and I sort of realised on day one, we did it very inefficiently, and I'll use a really simple example. So once I'd validated it and worked out that the channel worked, our first let's call them brand ambassadors, effectively salesperson, was based in Scotland. But we were first of all just cherry picking all the big events that we could find. There was a really big event in, I think it was somewhere like Cornwall, but you can imagine the inefficiency of sending someone from Scotland to Cornwall, and we pay the mileage, we pay the overnight stays. And what I knew is that was an inefficient model, but at scale, as we've now got brand ambassadors who's worked with us all over the country, we would start to bring that blended CPA down. So I was constantly banging the drum of the reasons to believe why this will work, and looking for those signals. And it was a bit of a challenge to get people over that, to get comfortable with it. But as it started to scale, that's come through. So that's the bit that definitely
I get that, Matt,
anyway.
But what made you decide in-person events in the first place?
Coming back to the customer. So we effectively have a fairly it's actually a fairly complicated proposition. So our format of food is quite unique to the UK. We're not just an off-the-shelf pet food product. There's some explanation, and I realised from, to be honest, testing things like door drops, that just having an offer with a picture saying buy pet food for X% off didn't work for us. And it came back to when speaking to customers, we realised that people we do post-purchase surveys as well, but people take up to 6, 7, 8 months, up to a year actually, to think about actually buying from considering it. And it's because people treat the dogs like babies, etc., and it's a really considered long process. And it was finding a format that would work with that. So our average time to speak to someone on a street and then in person sign them up, because we do it all in the moment, is about 15 minutes. So people are explaining it, why it'd be good for the dog, etc., and it was finding a channel that fit that kind of proposition from a customer perspective.
Nice. Just talking about building engagement with your customers and a brand that customers will love. Lisa, in all your experience, how do you go about doing that? Creating that customer loyalty, that love, that want to share it and build out that word of mouth?
Yeah, I mean, I feel quite fortunate. I've worked on some fantastic brands, but I've also been attracted to them because of what they already had as a foundation. I think it's really important, and it's interesting. Every time I come into a new business, I kind of look at the whole customer brand experience. Brand is every single touch point. And it sometimes feels like, oh, okay, that interaction with customer service is not that bad. We can solve that with some really funny advertising. I think it is thinking about all these interactions. How can we really delight customers, or not even customers, potential customers, in language, in added extras that don't necessarily have to cost a lot. I think I gave an example once before, because I think it's a good one. When I was at Wool and the Gang, first of all, the name, for those old enough, you'll recognize that it's a play off Kool and the Gang. And if you don't know who they are, you can look them up. You've heard at least one song. And everything off Wool and the Gang. It's a knitting brand. Knitting traditionally has been very unsexy, old grandma, etc. And here was, at the time, it was like young millennials were still in their 20s, and it was like, how do we make this sexy? So they started, with packaging, with naming. Every single time we released either a new yarn, a new color, a new design, we actually spent some time and had some fun with it. There was always sort of a reference to music in some way. I think the cotton was happy, shiny cotton. The wool was called crazy, sexy wool. And our customers asked for those things. They didn't say, oh, I need the chunky wool. They would say, I want crazy, sexy wool, hot pink or hot punk pink. If that was, I can't remember all the colors. It was a while ago. But that's just an example of how you can inject some real personality into things that don't cost anything, that it's the layering on of the brand experience. Did I answer a question? I got a bit.
Yeah, about how to create brands that love. Yeah, it's about being
okay, yeah. And I think it's about that. It is really the whole brand experience, and then have fun with your marketing and advertising. I'm just saying, I get the product and brand day-to-day brand experience right first.
Thank you. I love some of these names. That must have been so much fun coming up with them.
Oh yeah, it was lots of fun.
You've got crazy names for some of your pet foods?
We've not quite gone that far, to be fair, but no, I would probably say we've not done nearly enough of this type of thing, of thinking about like creating those what are called, I think, remarkable moments to get people like that, create that virality and get people talking about you. I think some of the things that we've done, which I think have led to people hopefully loving the brand, I remember in the quite early days, I remember reading the Zappos book about that kind of creating happiness with customers and also your team. And we purposely put all of our customer service team through nutritional qualifications. We paid them well above kind of like industry standard, and we didn't set metrics against them for like crazy wrap up times and all that type of stuff. And the reason for that is 95% of our customers tell us their dog has an issue. So fussiness, sensitive skin, etc., etc. So they're quite high need. So we actually find that calling is something that is really valuable, especially to the kind of slightly older demographic that some of our customer cohorts are. So we really took a position on over-investing in that and trying not to get too bogged down in making it as efficient as possible and thinking about the broader sort of brand proposition. And that's quite hard to quantify. And especially as you get bigger, everyone always challenges that when you're kind of looking at efficiencies. But it's something that we've tried to hold on to. But I think, to answer the question, we probably need to do more of that stuff. But that's something we were quite intentional about.
Thank you. And Jonathan, you have the opportunity to invest in tons of different D2C brands. What makes you choose the ones you do? What is it that stands out?
Yeah, so really, I could spend ages talking about this, but I'll sort of try and summarize it. So there are kind of, I guess, three really important things that are just sort of table stakes for any investor. So we always look at team, product, market. I think everyone kind of knows that. There's one thing that are really important. So yeah, really tying on to the last point, actually, we really care about brands and products that people love. So we'll do sort of qualitative and quantitative research. So we'll look at NPS scores and see how they've sort of trended over time. We'll go through Trustpilot and read reviews. We're not put off by bad reviews. That's just kind of what happens. But we always love to try and understand the story behind it. And I think most importantly, sort of understanding how things have evolved over time and what the team do to improve customer experience and to deal with situations where things don't go so well. So always having that at the core. Capital efficiency is really important as well. So sort of attached to what I was talking to before about metrics and so on. So businesses that are able to do lots with not much. Again, not reliant on having to keep raising funding to grow, but funding as a sort of to supercharge already healthy metrics. So we invested in a ski booking business recently last year called Heidi, doing really well. This was their first round, but they'd already got up to a very healthy 8-figure gross booking value before the point that we invested. Again, without just sort of bootstrapping. So those kind of things are really good. So we've invested in a pet insurance and wellness business very recently, as I mentioned, not yet announced. And all the kind of key things that you would expect, the exceptional founders that have a track record of building quickly in challenging environments, just getting stuff done quickly and effectively. The size of the market's really important, but not just the size on its own, but the sort of the nature of the market and how it's evolving and how it's growing. So big market's great and really important, I think, but all VC investments. But if we can sort of show why it's growing and what's sort of driving it, that's key as well. Retention. So on the kind of metrics, we always look at retention as one. So not, retention doesn't necessarily have to be good, but it's, we love to understand how it's evolving over time. Is it getting better? If it is getting better, how are they sort of driving that improvement? So again, just showing that the team sort of, are on top of the metrics and, the stuff that they're building is having an effect. So we'll also look for, a lot of investors talk about defensibility. The truth is a lot of early stage businesses just don't have defensibility. It's sort of, I think, unrealistic to expect that in the really early stages. But we love to understand, again, how it will evolve over time. So again, look at the business that we invested in very recently. They've got some smart tech around pricing. It's not completely unique, but they were sort of able to articulate and show that improvements to the technology, had an improvement on the pricing, and that's kind of given them better margins and so on. And you sort of, if we can, I guess, look at sort of how far they've traveled in the last year or two, it sort of gives credibility to an argument that it's going to improve further over the next year or two. And then the last point, and this is something that investors don't really talk about much because I guess it's a little bit craft, but the importance of being able to make a return. So if we invest money, we need to be able to make a return. Some funds are quite happy to make 2 to 3 times a return over a few years. Some funds need to make a 10 times return because they place riskier bets and they expect that most of their investments are, just aren't going to return anything. So it's important that founders are really aware, and I think that's something that Matt and his co-founder have always been really hot at. They've understood sort of, I guess, what they're kind of getting into and how VC funds work, and have been able to articulate, what a sort of exit path looks like. Why is Nestle or a similar business going to buy them in a few years' time, and what are they going to pay for them, and what do we need to do to sort of to get to that point? And I think the final point on that is understanding sort of how potential acquirers might price your business. So we've looked quite a lot in sort of the beauty and wellness sector recently. Luxury businesses can sort of achieve a 15 to 20 times profit multiple at exit. Sort of lower margin, more commoditized products, might only get sort of 5 times profit at exit or less. So again, founders that are really able to understand that and articulate it, and be quite upfront about those conversations with investors, I think generally do pretty well. That's kind of the reality of it, really.
It's not just about the metrics right now, it's what trajectory you're on. And
Exactly.
what's the end game for you as well. I cannot believe we've only got 10 minutes left. That's flown by. So I have one more question for panelists. And then actually, as a lot of you are spending a significant part of your budget on Instagram, I wanted to bring on Raf as well, because he's got some interesting insights on that as well. So for our panelists, last question for you until the audience starts firing them, is what do you think is the biggest mistake D2C founders make? And what's your one piece of advice for the audience? Lisa, I'm going to start with you.
Oh my goodness. The biggest mistake D2C founders make. Oh, that's a bit unfair. I think founders, to be honest, are so relentless that I was going to say, you have to keep going and testing and coming back to things that didn't work before. But founders keep going. I would maybe say, but I haven't worked with them because maybe I've selected very closely, those that don't put any value on developing a brand. I think in the long run, it's been proven, that their business isn't sustainable. They might get fantastic growth, when everything's going their way, but ultimately you need to have a brand that people know and love. So I would say perhaps not putting enough on that, but I haven't worked with those founders, I'm happy to say.
I think there'll be some very happy marketers in this group.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the challenge and the advice is really invest in your brand. Matt, what about you?
I think biggest mistake, I think Jonathan's answered it, to be fair. I think it's you don't set up a business to think about the end, but you've got to have a realistic end in mind. You know, the reality is when you do take on VC investment, you accept that there's going to be an event, and you have to think about, and Jonathan said exactly this, think about what trajectory and strategy you want to run. Do you want to run a growth at all costs, which could be unbelievable, but also could go in a ball of flames? Or do you want to run somewhere that, you know, goes on that kind of growth profitability trajectory, which is safer, but maybe not have the kind of huge exit, you know, when it comes to the end? And I think the people who kind of get that wrong are the ones that come unstuck. So I think that's the big bit. And then my piece of advice is the one thing I try to do basically every week is talk to customers. You know, I try to speak to, on Friday last week, we're looking at some pricing things. I spoke to a load of customers who cancelled because of price, because I wanted to understand the reasons behind the data. So always talk to customers, however big you are, I'd say. Yeah,
such great advice and so critical, yet so few senior leaders actually do that. Because we've got so many of you investing in Instagram, I just wanted to give you a little added bonus, which is to bring Raf on, who's got some really good insight into how businesses are using Instagram spend creative. So Raf, I'm going to give you the limelight right now.
Nice. Thanks, Nicola. So my name is Raf, the co-founder of AdManage. I used to work at Zoe as well, doing all the performance marketing. Hey, Lisa. So yeah, basically, if you're on the Meta train and you're doing a lot of ads, I have some interesting data actually to share with you guys. So you might want to know, like, you know, the goal, how you win at Meta, essentially, outside of, you know, offers, landing page, things like this outside of the account, is to get as many creative winners as possible. One of the ways you do this is, you know, just by testing a lot, but everyone, you know, has different monthly budgets on Meta, like how many ads should I be making? So this is something I actually recently looked into, and I can share kind of this anonymized data where, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
It's just this chart where basically these are the different like bracket of spend levels that we can see, you know, across like hundreds of different ad accounts now. And how many creatives, you know, these are all for D2C companies as well, and how many creatives they're doing per month. So this is, you know, 0 to 100K is roughly like 100 ads per month. This includes like variations of ads. So you can have one ad with like 10 different hooks, for example. That would count as 10 ads in this case for this data. But you can kind of see it's quite a like linear relationship where this increases over time. So if you're in the, you know, 200, there's ambulances in the background. If you're in like the 250 to 500K mark per month, it's like 400, 1 mil plus. There's a lot of outliers there where some do a lot more, some do a lot less. But yeah, it's pretty interesting as like a good benchmark for whatever stage you're at on what I'm seeing as to what's working. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's amazing. So how many were you running at Zoe?
We were doing like 3 at the peak, probably 300 to 400 a month.
Oh my goodness. And how many of those were like small iterations on the same creative before I freak out and go, oh my goodness, that's 400 different types of ads?
No, yeah, it is probably at least like, I don't know, 3 to 5 iterations on each.
Right.
So maybe probably at max like 100 uniques. But we would also like change things up in the ad, so it's like a bit more of a variation. Like we would reuse content a lot to tell different stories. There's a lot of ways you can get like really creative on how you use your assets. But yeah, this is like one of the name of the game on Meta is like just how many creative winners can you make? Because that is one of the biggest factors to scaling your account.
And thank you for that graph. I will share it in a follow-up email because you may want that if you're trying to get sign off on more creative resource. So it's a really useful asset to have. And Raf, if people have got more questions, are you happy for them to just reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn or email. I could drop my email, but yeah, LinkedIn, I'm pretty active there. So
great. Well, we have 3 whole minutes left. So any questions from our audience? Very quiet. Okay. I'm going to ask a very quick one then, because we haven't had a chance to touch on it. But this is one for Matt. You know, retention is really key here, as Jonathan was talking about, to get those metrics right. Are there any particular tactics that you've put in play for retention and to stop that churn?
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot is the honest answer, but I think one of the things we've recently started doing is, first of all, having a good data set. So we have a cancellation flow that gives us all the reasons why people cancel. But one thing we've started to do, and actually we've just had some data, I've just seen it on Slack today be released, but we've started to think about being proactive in retention rather than reactive. So obviously when they cancel, you're reactively finding out the reason and then trying to think about it, but actually thinking about what are the moments that people have the most potential to cancel. And for us, the kind of moment of truth is effectively, does your dog eat the food? But there's ways in which you can get in front of that, because I won't bore you with transitioning a dog onto a new food, but there's quite a lot of nuance to it, and there's quite a lot of effort involved, and actually proactively getting in front. So we now have like a series of comms where on like first meal, we ask the customer, how did your dog get on with the food? And then off the back of that goes into a series of different flows where we actually might even then proactively call you and recommend like a consultation depending on what you've said. So that proactive rather than reactive approach has been beneficial to us. And I think we're going to start to really double down on that.
It's helpful. Yeah, being proactive. It's all about, we've all had those emails after you've left a business going, oh, how can we win you back? And it's like, you should have spoken to me about a month ago. Lisa, anything you want to add in on that, particularly with your work at Zoe and Newman?
On the retention front,
yeah,
specifically,
I
think working elements into the product itself, if possible, like even thinking about the subscription pricing and like really going back to sort of first principles and going like, well, what happens if I was setting this up again? Is there a different way of engineering the retention into the product and price? And, I think most people are doing it these days with, places like Klarna, the opportunity that Klarna gives and so forth. But there's probably some other thoughtful ideas that you could consider, but I think that's where I would point my efforts, is thinking about the product and pricing and longevity of the subscriptions, but in a different way than the standard 1, 3, 12 months.
I would just very quickly build on that, because one of the things
Thanks, Matt.
one of the things we've started to look at this year, which we've not done enough of, is really think about customer segmentation. So we have customers who've come from very different places. So we have, we label them like, we have people who are, I would class as like a dog's a dog type mentality. We're very like price, the dog eats anything, sort of as long as they're happy, I'm not really bothered, to the extreme of, my dog's not eating the food, so therefore I'm starting to cook them a Sunday lunch every night, and then everything in between. But those customers, when you look at them and you split them out in the data, behave very differently. And the reasons why they cancel, the reasons why they stay, and what they want from the proposition is very different. So we're starting to explore and think about, to your point, Lisa, like, how can we rethink the proposition based on these segments who act very differently and want very different things, and starting to think about literally right down to the product. Like, does the onboarding products need to be different for this type of customer versus this? Don't have the answer with it yet, but that's something that we're very much starting to think about now.
It's an exciting challenge. Yeah. Anyway, not to go into that too deeply, but
not all customers are the same.
Yes, exactly.
I may be borrowing you again for one on retention, because I think we got halfway through the questions because there were so many amazing insights there. So I know I need to let you all go as we're 1 minute over. Thank you so much for joining, and all those that contributed, and big thank you to our fabulous panelists, Matt, Lisa, and Jonathan. And I might give them a couple of months off, and then I'm going to see if I can steal them back again, because they are just so good. Thanks everyone, and have a wonderful rest of day.
Bye. Thanks, Nicola. Bye, everyone.